Welcome to ThePrint. 2025 is a politically very significant year for India, primarily because the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, the RSS, turns 100 years this year. And remember, when in 1925 the RSS was established, India was under colonial rule, and now in 2025, it's an affiliate of the RSS, the BJP, which has been in power for more than 10 years in India. So it has been quite a journey for this organization, which has been both deeply admired and also seeped in deep controversies throughout its 100-year journey. And to talk more about this organization as it turns 100 years old, we have Professor Walter Andersen. He is, by a margin, one of the biggest, one of the most important voices on the RSS for any student who's of the RSS with any degree of interest or curiosity in the organization. His books, as I've said before, are mandatory readings. Thank you so much, Professor, for joining us.
Thank you for asking me to join you.
Right. So, first up, as I mentioned, it's been 100 years of the RSS, and it's been a very significant journey, not just for the organization, but for India itself. And for the longest time, the organization has been believed to be anti-minority, have a very conservative ideology. How do you see this portrayal of this organization 100 years from when it was established? And do you think the RSS has been able to shed some of this image over the last few years?
Well, it certainly has been changes in the RSS on a number of issues. It has evolved. I did a book. I've actually done a couple of books on the RSS. The latest one, I go through some of the evolution on major issues that have arisen. There's controversy, difference of opinion within the RSS, which a lot of people have found curious, because the assumption is you have a leader and everyone falls in line. That's not the case. You do have debates on issues, and on some issues, like labor issues, there has been significant differences. And the RSS has always operated on the principle of consensus. And so if you can't have a consensus, they usually put it off. And on the labor issue, it's interesting because they didn't put off the issue entirely, but they left it to the various states to come out with their own, policies on how labor issues would be handled. And it was a way to avoid controversy because, as I said, the RSS from the beginning has focused on the issue of consensus, that you have in the organization a sense of purpose and where it's going. It's not that, the leader's view, in this case, the Sarsanghchalak, the head's view, or his deputies, necessarily is accepted without a debate, because there are debates. Here again, I've written about that. But they have a sense of trying to sort of, organize themselves in a way that makes an issue what they see as the growth of India economically, Indian nationalism, pride in being Indian. And it's interesting one should put it that way, because today, why would you, even look at that? Because there was a time when, particularly among the intellectual classes in India, there was a question about whether Indians really respected their own culture or not. And I know some RSS people would tell me that, many educated Indians know Shakespeare better than their ancient classics of India, which is probably true.
Continues to be.
And continue to be probably as well. But I'd say less so than in the past, because I think what's happened, in my mind, one of the major changes that's taken place in India has been a growing pride, not only in being Indian, but in the consequences of what India has done. The economy is the fastest growing of the world economies. It's now 5th largest, and within the next few years could be the 3rd largest, passing Japan and Germany. And one only has to look. Every time I come here, and I come here frequently, I'm always amazed by changes that are taking place. And I'll give you one close example that you probably know, the Dwarka Expressway. When we first arrived, we had to get to our hotel. And so the Dwarka Expressway is not the shortest, but in some ways it was the most convenient. I was amazed
Yeah.
It was, the reflection of the kind of modernity that highway, had.
Yeah.
And I'm told that you see this all over India, this growth in infrastructure.
Absolutely. But on the question of the RSS's image as an organization which has been perceived for very long to be anti-minority, how do you see this image of the RSS, and do you think that has fundamentally changed?
I don't think it's anti-minority. Because particularly the present Sarsanghchalak leader and his immediate predecessor, have argued that what the RSS stands for is a kind of nationalism, and that nationalism encompasses everybody. In fact, some people had questioned when the present Sarsanghchalak had said, in effect, that Muslims are Hindu. Now, what did he mean by the term Hindu? He meant something cultural.
Yes.
Just like, for example, some RSS people have mentioned to me in Germany, the two major religious groups.
For the clarity of our viewers, you're talking about his statement when he said that Hindus and Muslims share the same DNA.
Yes, there's that. And therefore, they're not like, people like, they've been charged this term Nazi, so similar to what the Nazis were in Germany in the 20s and 30s and 40s, in that Jews were not considered by the Nazis to be German or truly German. They were some foreigners who would come. Whereas there was some, in India, even now, and certainly earlier, who saw Muslims as invaders. And it certainly was true among some RSS people as well, and some even now, that Muslims were from the outside. He's argued that, no, he said at one point during that seminar that you and I were talking about, that he could not imagine an India without Muslims.
Yes.
And that, the notion that Muslims are outsiders is wrong. They're part of us.
Yeah.
And I think that was a very smart thing to do. And there are within the RSS, and I have a whole chapter on this, there are Muslim organizations within the RSS that sort of cater to approaching Muslims in a way that respects, their religion. In fact, Mohan Bhagwat himself, the President Sarsanghchalak himself, has said that we have nothing against that religion as such, as long as they are patriotic Indians, which is what really counts. And I think that was a smart thing to do. And he's not the first to have said that. So are there some who are anti-RSS, are anti-Muslim? Yes, there are. But it's not, the view of the leadership is not anti-Muslim.
I think it's a very important time to sort of zoom in on this question, because over the last few months itself, we have seen that the RSS Sarsanghchalak, Mohan Bhagwat, he's repeatedly made statements that have seemingly either not gone down very well with the cadres, or they have not paid enough attention to them. A case in point is Bhagwat saying that we should stop looking for a shivling under every mosque.
Yes.
And this is clearly something which the larger Sangh Parivar cadres do not seem to agree with or paying attention to. Do you think this is a well thought out strategy of playing good cop, bad cop, or is this actually a problem that the RSS is facing, where there is a divergence in views between the leadership and the cadres of the different organizations?
Well, I'm not sure how significant the difference is. I haven't seen a poll on that issue. Now, they have a polling system within, and so they may have a sense of that.
Oh, they have a polling system?
Oh, they have a kind of polling system, within the organization. They go to the various shakas and to find out, what their views are on X, Y, and Z. So,
oh, really? Okay.
So that might, so I suspect they have a sense of that. Though I don't think that, there could be people who differ, and there are, because people have been quoted from within the RSS who themselves differ.
I mean, we saw recently an organizer had a cover issue on sort of this being part of the civilizational justice, the pursuit of civilizational justice, to sort of keep looking at mosques and see their history. And a couple of days later, the Sarsanghchalak again made a statement about not raking up these kind of issues.
Right. And, the present Sarsanghchalak is known as somewhat liberal in his views. He's not the only one. There are others as well, like his deputy, Hosbole. Dr. Treya Hosbole. And I think the fact they said it makes a difference, however, because they are the leaders. And within the organization, there is a sense that you don't overly criticize. You can criticize them, but you have to be careful in how you do it. And the fact they said it gives a certain legitimacy. And that's true throughout the world in terms of management leadership. If the leadership comes out with a certain view on something, particularly like this, and this isn't the only one, there are others as well, like the issue of homosexuality that we talked about,
Yes.
and LGBT issues, where this leadership has been very, in some ways, accommodative of the, more so I can say than many of the leaders in the US are on this issue, on the LGBT issue. But so it makes a difference.
But you know, at least from the outside, what it would seem that when the Sarsanghchalak speaks on an issue like that, that would be considered as the final word. But that it's not how that has played out over the last couple of years.
No,
there are controversies after controversies on the issue of mosques.
There is, and also the issue that that's the final word is not right. Here again, my latest book, I go into that as well, that there are issues that even though the Sarsanghchalak has made a certain statement, it doesn't necessarily mean that's the last word. There can be continuing debate about that issue. And that there is in this issue as well. I mean, there are those, as you well know, in the RSS who don't look at the issue of mosques that were built on temples, because there are questions of that, which is one reason some Muslims have said, you know, this notion of having an analysis, excavations to find out, which is, I think, what Mohan Bhagwat really meant by the thing is, you know, if you find a Shivlingam underneath every mosque, that doesn't there become a reason, you know, for protest. And I think that's, you know, I can sympathize with what I think what he's trying to do is stability in India, in his view, is very important. And I think he sees that as a patriotic Indian that looks at the country, it's, you know, to the extent that there's a kind of unity is important, I think. And after all, Muslims are a significant part of the Indian population. What is it? What is the percentage of the country that's Muslim? 15%, 14%, something like that.
Yeah.
In some places, particularly here in the north, more. And I think he thinks it's important that you don't insult them as a group. And I think what he's trying to do is avoid this thing of labeling them as a group in ways that, you know, could be construed as threatening to others in the country, which can be destabilizing. And I'm reminded a couple of years ago there were some riots in Delhi.
2020.
Yeah, right. And the RSS leadership, in a sense, came out and advocated, you know, that this should stop. And here, I think, for reasons of patriotism, that it's important that we think of ourselves as Indian. You know, one can also, advance that in other areas, like if you're a South Indian and North Indian. My wife is from Tamil Nadu, speaks Tamil. She can speak Hindi as well, but a lot of people who in the South can't speak Hindi and will not speak Hindi as a matter of pride. But you know, so this is a country, a lot of people have been amazed by how a country as diverse as this, in many ways is united as well.
But you know, Professor, what I'm trying to also understand is that when I, for instance, travel, and I tend to spend a lot of time with local RSS leaders in different districts, in different towns, cities, etc. And there you see a very obvious gap between the messaging of the Sarsanghchalak and what an ordinary Karyakarta is doing on a daily basis, which is talking about conversions, talking about these sort of temple mosque disputes. So do you think that, I mean, I'm trying to get a definite answer from you here. Is there a gap between the leadership and the lower level, local level?
Probably there is some. And it varies by parts of India that you're in, whether urban, educated. Here again, if you were to take and I haven't seen polling on that issue. People should do it, but it hasn't happened that I've seen. So among sort of better educated urban people, my guess is there's a certain acceptance of that. If you go into poor areas or people who are less educated in rural areas, you will probably have a more conservative view. But that's not only here. The idea that a kind of conservatism in rural areas is very common. It's not only just India. It's in the US, for example.
So you don't think this is a strategy? This is just how things tend to play out. It's not a strategy of the RSS leadership saying one thing and their activists and karyakartas doing the other.
Well, not all the activists. Here again, I haven't seen a good polling on that. And like you and I have, we probably have a better sense than many people what it is, but it's not accurate. There's no real poll of how people look at these issues, and maybe there should be on that, but there hasn't that I know of. And as I said before, in our conversation earlier, that the RSS itself probably has the best internal polling on these issues, and to find out from them, what the stand is, and I'm sure they know that there are differences of opinion. But nonetheless, Mohan Bhagwat and others have come out very strongly, saying that Muslims are our brothers. This whole idea of DNA is the same. That we are basically the same. And which is a lot of truth there. They probably are. Muslims here and Hindus probably are very similar backgrounds. You had a few Muslims who have come in from the outside, but the numbers as a percentage is actually quite small from everything I know and I've read. And I think he was trying to make that point. They're really part of us, and we should handle that issue as being part of us. And in a sense, the RSS does, is they have a couple of organizations, and every one of their major affiliates, like the political party, the labor union, the student group, has specific parts of it that appeal to Muslim students. So if in fact the RSS was anti-Muslim, you wouldn't see this. The notion that each of their major affiliates has except for one, that's the Vishwa Hindu Parishad, because that appeals specifically to the Hindu ecclesiastical establishment. But, you wouldn't have these organizations. It just wouldn't be there. I mean, if you argued that Muslims are not part of us, then how is it that your major affiliated organizations specifically appeal to Muslims?
From the time of Golwalkar to now Bhagwat, one does see a major evolution, or at least difference in the articulation on the question of the Muslim. And I understand there's no homogeneous view that the RSS must have, but for our viewer, if you can just break down what is the RSS's view on Muslims, because from Golwalkar, who did see them as the internal enemies, to Bhagwat saying that they are the same DNA essentially, how do we make sense of this?
Well, partly is to go back to this notion of evolution of ideas over time. And where this really begins to show up is Golwalkar's successor, Deoras. Deoras, in many ways, he was RSS Sarsanghchalak for quite a long time until he got very ill. But he began to sort of focus on organizations within the RSS and its affiliates that appeal to Muslims. And if people should really read Deoras more closely in his speeches, because he has a sense that, we Indians, we're really a kind of unity in diversity. And that certainly is a view that has sort of become a stronger view in the RSS since Deoras's time. Here again, even though some people swear by Golwalkar, as you probably know, you've been around, some do, the notion that there is an evolution, more or less, at least at the leadership level, has taken place. And one of the key areas of where there's evolution is the notion of Muslims. That, as you say, the DNA, we're really the same. And, ethnically, we are the same people. We may have a different religion, but look at Hinduism. Hinduism is divided into hundreds of sects and languages, and yet there's a sense that we have a commonality. Now, there are certain cultural commonalities, like that, a common Diwali, for example, and others, which kind of unite all. But I know some Muslim friends who celebrate Diwali, for example. And some even celebrate, Hindus and Muslims celebrate Christmas. Now, Christmas is more distinct than Diwali is distinctly Indian, whereas Christmas is not. It's something that came in. But in a sense, it has become Christianized. You go to Kerala, and in Kerala you have the Martoma Christians who have a unique cultural background, which is distinctly Indian.
Yes.
And so I think you have a change that's been taking place in the RSS, an evolution, which is, not everyone accepts the idea that Muslims and Hindus are bye-bye, hey. But the leadership does. And that makes a difference because they have a certain influence on how, for example, very importantly, the BJP reacts to this sort of thing. And,
I mean, even within the BJP, you see a sort of divergence, right? Because on one hand, we've had Prime Minister Modi send a chadar to the Ajmer Sharif Dargah
every
year. And in Uttar Pradesh, if you look at the Chief Minister, his stand is markedly different on the issue of temples and mosques. So even within the BJP, there seems to be a sort of split on the issue.
Of course, the Chief Minister of UP is not a member of the RSS and never has been. And for some, that makes a difference in terms of how he reacts to this.
I mean, he's always been considered more right of the RSS.
Right, yes, he is.
Yes.
So yes, there is a difference in it, but there has been a distinctly evolution. And it's not an evolution, it's simply the RSS, so partly it's a reflection of what's happening in Indian society. Indian society is changing, and in some very significant ways, as it's become wealthier, it's become more urbanized. As the literacy has increased, I think of India now, what I know of it now through my wife and people who work in her factory, and the time that I was here as a student. It's a different place. It literally is a different place. And, in terms of people's aspirations for themselves, people have a sense of success for themselves.
And RSS has always, if I'm not wrong, been a creature of urban spaces way more than rural spaces.
But one of their objectives now, as I'm sure you know, is to increase the RSS presence in rural India.
Yes.
Because they have been weaker in rural India, and for reasons that that you're alluding to, is that it's more conservative. And so if you have a leader saying that Muslims and Hindus are actually ethnically the same, is what he's saying. There's really no ethnic difference between us two. There was some people who disagree with that, and you probably heard some who do. But I say as India changes, you're getting a view of a commonality which you didn't have before.
Right.
My wife tells me that she recalls, in the South, if someone spoke Hindi, there would be an offense at that. And for some, that could well be. And that, with the language policy and education here, there were some places which really didn't teach a South Indian language. They were supposed to, but they didn't. I think that's becoming rare. People are beginning, knowing that these languages, these various ethnic groups, we are all Indian, have a lot in common. And particularly as India, becomes wealthier and modernizes, people are mixing. If you look at statistics of people who move from one area to the other, it's really quite incredible. You have literally a country on the move. And you have people who have a different view of themselves.
Do you think RSS is also becoming more cosmopolitan?
Oh yes, absolutely. Yes.
Give us evidence.
If you look at look at Hosbole, the number 2. Where is he from? Karnataka. Yes, he's from the south, and can speak the languages of the south, a couple of the languages of the south fluently. The head of the RSS himself can speak South Indian languages because he thinks it's important to do so. Even though the difference between Tamil, for example, and Hindi is quite different. I mean, they have a lot of words that are common, but languages are essentially different. And yet there is a sense in the RSS that we have a kind of commonality, that's really based on living together for 3,000 years, 4,000 years, and that's had impact on us as a people.
I think we spoke of cosmopolitanism within RSS. There's also the question of wealth. There are a lot of allusions, and I think in a recent column, even Sudhindra Kulkarni said that there is beginning to be some evidence of the fact that RSS leaders activists are also becoming wealthier and greedier. I don't remember exactly the word he used, but something of that to that effect. Do you think that's happening? Is RSS becoming wealthier?
Well, particularly in urban India, I'd say that's probably true. I haven't seen statistics about where shakas are located, but I'm told they tend to be located in middle-class areas.
Yes.
And so obviously, and they have a focus, is a very middle-class Indian view. Education is all important. How many stories have I heard from Indian families in the US who insist their children study, study, study.
Mm.
And sometimes those children say, oh no, I want to go out and play. I want to play baseball. I want to play football or whatever. No, you have to study. You have to why do you have to study? You have to make more of yourself. And that gives you the opportunity, it opens doors for you. And that's true in India too. Here again, Indian families I know.
But what about the RSS?
Yes, it's certainly in the RSS, the people who are RSS members and some of
because austerity is key, has been key to the RSS.
Well,
the idea of austerity.
At the top level, you have people are not married.
Yes.
And it isn't because it's required they're not married, though. Among some people, there was a time when to be a pracharak full time, it was considered to be getting in the way of your work. So, like Roman Catholic priests, it gets in the way of your work, to be married and have a family. That itself is beginning to break down.
Oh, really?
And look at a person like Advani, who was a pracharak, but he's married and had a family as well.
But if I'm not wrong, pracharaks always have the option of moving to a married life, but they cease to be pracharaks.
Well, not entirely.
Okay.
Not entirely, because I know cases where pracharaks continue to do work that they had done in the past. But obviously, if you are married, you have obligations that take you away from, kind of full-time work in the RSS. No, it's not as if you're expunged from the RSS if you get married.
But you're saying the rules of celibacy and austerity, or the norm of celibacy and austerity, they're kind of, are they loosening a bit within the organization?
Yes, there's no doubt about that, Banu. They're loosening. And there doesn't seem to be a reaction of horror. Oh my goodness, the organization is falling apart because there's a loosening on. I haven't seen that, to be quite frank. And in fact, that issue was marginally addressed in this famous seminar that Hedgewar had a couple of years ago here in Delhi. That was
you're talking about Bhagwat.
Bhagwat, yes, not Hedgewar. Bhagwat had
yes,
a couple of years ago. That issue was actually sort of marginally came up, and I think people should look at that. It was an interchange, as you know, between people, and you had a lot of intellectuals at that gathering, asking Bhagwat, serious questions about issues that there were controversial issues, and that one did come up marginally, and I think he kind of really skirted. He didn't make a big point of that. He kind of skirted it. It wasn't
on the question of celibacy.
Yeah, on the issue of celibacy, and even though among the top leadership, as I think of them, they're largely, you take, kind of the cabinet of the RSS, they're largely celibates. Not all of them are, but, I'd say a majority are. But you get one layer below that, then, my guess is probably the majority are married.
And this hasn't always been the case.
No, that hasn't always. In the initial days, it sort of followed, and some people have written about this, in the time of the founding in the 1920s, 1925 and on. They really had an approach on these issues which were very similar to Hindu monastic orders. Because in Hindu monastic orders, the monks and nuns were unmarried.
Yes.
And that was a requirement. In fact, to a certain extent among them, it's still the case,
yes,
unmarried. And it was largely the case, at least in the leadership of the RSS as well. Not entirely. There were some who were not. But if you look, for example, take when the Jansangh was formed, with the support of Golwalkar, and he turned to Shyam Prasad Mukherjee from the Hindu Mahasabha,
yes,
to help put this organization together. And the original pracharaks, full-timers from the RSS, who were loaned to the Jansangh, were largely unmarried. You know, Deen Dayal Upadhyay was unmarried. Atal Bihari Vajpayee was unmarried, and others were as well unmarried. That's, if you look today, I'd say you'd find a large number of people who've come from the RSS who are married. Not everybody, like the friend of our mutual acquaintance Rob Madhav is unmarried. But there are many, you know, at his level who are married, and it hasn't become the kind of issue, a divisive issue, that was in the past. It may among some, but it's not really one of those earth-shaking issues that has divided the organization. They're willing to live with it. I think, you know, among many, they see being unmarried as a worthy self-sacrifice for the nation, but it's not something everyone will do. So.
On the question of the RSS's relationship with the BJP, I mean, in the Lok Sabha elections, and of course, the big story was the RSS not campaigning for the BJP, and then the subsequent elections in Haryana and Maharashtra, they did. They were sort of working together.
And you saw the difference.
And we saw the difference. But tell our viewers a little bit about the trajectory of the RSS Jansangh/BJP relationship over the years, because it has not always been seamless. And of course, the time of Vajpayee and Sudarshan is the most well known. But even now, we see there are instances of what are perceived to be digs by Mohan Bhagwat at Narendra Modi. So just explain to our viewers what this relationship has been and how it has evolved.
Well, the leadership of Jansangh and then the BJP has largely come from the ranks of the RSS.
Yes.
In fact, the Prime Minister himself is a pracharak of the RSS, and has always shown respect for the leadership of the RSS. In fact, they have often been invited to sit, you know, where you have like funerals of significant members. You find, you know, RSS leaders when the Ram Temple in Ayodhya was dedicated. You had political leaders and RSS leaders, and you know, and then the national leadership like Modi, all was sitting there around the fire, and you know that was considered, you know, a very important effort to unify the country around some cultural symbols of what it is, India. I have my own view about what that temple signifies. I think it's looked at like Notre Dame is looked at in France, the cathedral. It technically is a Roman Catholic church. It is not the head of the archdiocese. There's another church that is, but it is a church of the Roman Catholic in the Roman Catholic Church of France. But it's also seen as a French symbol. And when it was reopened, you had people from the whole French situation and society attending. And a friend of mine who's French said, I can see in the front row the head of the largest Protestant church in France is sitting. And someone later sort of asked that person what he felt about the dedication. He said, it's important. This is a symbol of France. And I think it is, in fact. The reaction indicated that. I'd say at the Ram Temple in Ayodhya, there's a certain similarity in that as well. Many of the artisans, in fact, a fairly high percentage of the artisans working on that temple were Muslim.
Yes, but also, you know, a few months after the Ram Temple was inaugurated, the Lok Sabha elections happened, where we saw a bit of the two organizations, RSS and the BJP, were not working in tandem. And
not on politics.
Not in politics.
Yeah, but in certain areas they were. On the temple they were.
Yeah.
In fact, it wasn't just the RSS and BJP. You had other groups.
Sure.
It all became, in fact.
But you know, in the aftermath of the election, we saw Mohan Bhagwat, for example, very famously said, and it became big news when he said that, you know, he said something about arrogance in politics being a disadvantage, and it was widely believed that he was alluding to Prime Minister Narendra Modi. So I'm trying to get at this tension between the RSS and BJP, and because these moments of tension have always been there. So what does that tell us about the relationship of the two organizations?
There's always been a certain tension. At the time of the formation of the Jansangh, Golwalkar was a lot of pressure within the organization to have a separate political party, that they become a political party. And Golwalkar insisted that that would undermine, if not over the long run, destroy. And in fact, I was told when a visit to Nagpur a few years ago that some people wanted to put in the word into the term Jansangh, Hindu Jansangh. Golwalkar opposed that because he said that that was a kind of situation, a political party that we hopefully they will support our views, but as a party, they're not, quote unquote, a religious party. And in fact, that's often been a view, particularly on the outside this country. It's often the Jansangh and then the BJP has often been looked at as a Hindu party. It is not. I mean, it has the whole spectrum of Indians who are members. There are Christians who are in it. There are Muslims who are in it. There are BJP. Now, there's more of one than the other, but nonetheless, it has everybody in it. And I think the notion that it is Hindu would be an impossible notion. Hinduism itself is so divided, in how many sects, hundreds of sects in different languages, that how would you present yourself in getting an amalgam? And if you've got an amalgam, you get something that exists now, something which is above those kind of differences.
Professor, if you can actually give us a peek into, and this is a question about the inner workings of the RSS. For example, when in Lok Sabha, the RSS cadres did not campaign for the BJP, and then in Maharashtra and Haryana elections, they did. Who takes these decisions? How is the decision made? Because from what I see from the leadership down to the to the block level karyakarta, everyone seems to be following a certain instruction. Where does that instruction come from? Do you support the campaign for the BJP or do you not?
It's both up and down. Normally, when you have big decisions that have to be made, they first canvass within it. For example, at the time that Modi, was sort of elevated to be the prime ministerial candidate, they had, and I talk about this in my book, they had a kind of internal poll. And overwhelmingly, Modi was by far the person that most of them felt, would make an effective prime minister that we could live with.
Do you think the decision to not campaign for the BJP in the Lok Sabha elections would have been taken unanimously as well, like this?
Very seldom have I seen unanimity inside the RSS. Very seldom. There is, on most big issues, there has been a debate, and I'm sure there was in this one as well. But however, when they make a decision, when they come to a consensus, it's very important to keep consensus in mind. Because Indian organizations typically have been known to be very divisive. I mean, this is, in fact, my advisors who asked me to do a study of the RSS said the unusual thing about the then Janasangh and now BJP is it has had very few divisions among them.
Yes.
Look at the opposition, the Congress Party, major divisions. Look at the Communist Party in India. You had two big parties, now you had several who both descended from the CPM and CPI. So there is an effort to reach a consensus and to hold off on making decisions until you get one. I'll give you a very common, though in some ways funny example of that. The RSS volunteers now have long pants.
Yes.
They didn't used to. They used to have short pants. And how did they come to that? It took years before they actually reached a decision on that. And there was major divisions that if we change the way we dress, it changes the way people look at us. Well, there's certain truth to that. But they made the decision ultimately. And now if you see a shaka or a group meeting of the RSS, they all have, except for young boys, they all have, certainly all men, they all have long pants.
Yeah. But on the question of the RSS-BJP relationship, of course there are moments of tension. But going ahead, do you think the two organizations can ever fundamentally sort of split? Because we have seen in the past RSS also support the Congress. So do you think there can a situation can arise where the RSS feels that the BJP is quote unquote going astray and they decide to sort of foundationally part ways?
The last Lok Sabha elections.
But that was not a permanent split of any.
And there are other cases too, as you know, where they have had differences of opinion, particularly when Sudarshan was the Sarsanghchalak. Where he and Vajpayee had big differences on a whole range of things, though it didn't lead to a formal split.
Yes.
And I think that would be take some doing to get to that point. Most of the RSS leadership, of the BJP leadership,
comes from the RSS.
Comes from where the training is in the RSS, and the notion of national unity and unity among ourselves is very important, and that has always been the case, even back to time in the 30s, where Indian organizations were under a great deal of stress, to work for independence and how strongly to work for independence. The RSS stood out as an organization that didn't split. In fact, when Veer Savarkar of the Hindu Mahasabha wanted to establish something, as I have been told, he was very impressed by the fact that, unusual for an Indian organization at the time, there are some, but almost no instances of splitting, because the membership has been trained. It's important we stick together as an organization to get things done. And I think that's what you see. You didn't see any move to have a separate organization at the time of the Lok Sabha elections.
So a formal split is unlikely.
No, highly unlikely.
Highly unlikely.
Highly unlikely. As long as the BJP leadership continues to get its cadre mainly from the RSS. Now what's happening is the BJP under Amit Shah has established its own training system.
Right.
And I'd be curious, in fact, one of the things I'd like to sort of find out is, Amit Shah established these some time ago, is to what extent, what difference does that make? And maybe you have a sense of, what difference does it make if you come from outside the RSS rather than from within? So far, most of the cadre who have come in, at least at the upper level, have come from the RSS. But, my guess is, I don't know. In fact, something you might want to do a story on is to what extent, people are coming from outside the organization and those people sort of rising up in the ranks, because as we all know, there are some like that even now who are prominent in the BJP, who've come from outside. The man we just mentioned, who is the chief minister of Uttar Pradesh, India's largest state, is from outside the BJP, the RSS.
Yes.
There are others as well.
Yes. There has been so much speculation about the quote-unquote digs that Mohan Bhagwat has been taking at the Prime Minister ever since the Lok Sabha results came out. His comment on arrogance not being a virtue is only one example.
But that's not new. Within the RSS, even going back to the time of the RSS founder, when the organization was established in 1925, there was long a suspicion of politics. Then and now, there's continued to be in the RSS a sense that, in fact, in the last Lok Sabha elections, when many RSS people moved over to work in the BJP, the head of the RSS had to sort of kind of warn them that this is not the most important thing you're doing. You're doing this thing as an element in patriotism, but you need to come back to the RSS.
But certainly, Bhagwat's comments have been more frequent and been more stark ever since the Lok Sabha results came out. So I just want to ask if you can throw some light on what the relationship between Bhagwat and Modi really is.
As far as I know, they respect each other for what they do. And here again, they have to keep in mind that at least among the leadership, there is a sense that the two organizations fundamentally are different in objectives. The RSS is a training, it's like a school. It trains people. In fact, you start the training ideally at the age of 5 and 6, and you continue as an adult. Though along the way, and here there are statistics, along the way there's been a drop-off of people who do this every day. But a sufficient number who do. And so, you have a sense of loyalty that's built up over time. This is why, it's important, I think, just intellectually, to look at those who come from the outside. They're still a minority at the upper level. But for example, in the cabinet today, not everyone, but the overwhelming majority are from the RSS. But not everybody, including, the foreign minister himself is not from the RSS. And there are others who are not.
Are people like the foreign minister who don't come from the RSS, is there some degree of suspicion that the RSS has towards them?
Not entirely, because I think, at least among the leadership, as long as the person does an effective job in doing what governments do, and in this case, represent India abroad. He's done a very effective job in that. And so I've looked at publications like Organizer and other publications, Panchajanya, who are closely associated with the RSS. To be quite frank, I've never seen an article yet critical of the External Affairs Minister. So as long as they do an effective job, if they don't do it, and this could be a person from the RSS background, if they don't do an effective job, or if they're caught cheating in one way or the other, then they're willing, and they have, willing to abandon them.
One of the biggest sources of tension that was speculated between the RSS and the BJP was the RSS's suspicion or skepticism towards what they call personality cults, and in specific context of Prime Minister Modi. Do you think that is a problem for the RSS?
Probably a certain problem, because let's face it, Modi is without a doubt, in the whole Sangh Parivar, is by far the most significant personality. I think he knows that as well. And I think he's been rather careful in how he presents himself, that, he's not a god, he's not necessarily a hero, but he is by far, the person who has the most influence. And he is influential in in fact, the larger Indian political world, if not increasingly in the world stage. He's the person who counts. People, listen to him. There's certainly, and on the RSS side, they have tried to downplay the individuals, including, the head of the RSS and others, their own individuality.
Correct.
And this is very different from politics. In politics, you kind of stress individuality.
But do you think they would prefer collective leadership to, say, the kind of leadership that BJP has, which is very concentrated at the moment?
Yeah.
Do you think they would prefer the former?
To be quite frank, I haven't. That's an interesting question. Next time I say, I shall ask them that. I'm not sure. I think what's important is how effective they are in governing. To what extent externally do they represent Indian interests? To what extent do you find a certain, sympathy toward the middle class? To what extent, are there job opportunities being created? And if you read the Sarsanghchalak's, his kind of State of the Union every year around October, when he gives his speech, the focus in the last couple years, and it's interesting to read them, have focused on helping Indians prosper, what to do. So the other element is on corruption, how to get away from corruption. But there's a certain element also that leaders need, as you noted, particularly the last one talked about leaders not being arrogant. And here again, that's been a trope in the RSS, that politics is a dangerous profession because it
corrupts.
It corrupts. And there's no doubt, having been not in politics, but in bureaucracy myself before I got into academics, there's certain truth to that. There is a certain corruption possibility. And particularly the higher you go in the organization, the more exists. So it's probably not a bad thing that you try to focus on, focus on what the person does rather than who they are. Because when you begin to focus on who they are, in some ways that's very dangerous, because then that leads to a kind of authoritarian complex that one has to be careful about. And so the very fact you have...
Are they fearful of this
of course.
component
Yes.
in Prime Minister Modi?
Yes, that and Atal Bihari Vajpayee as well. There was Sudarshan, and Vajpayee had real clashes with each other. So, this is not new. Now, with a non-BJP, they think obviously it's much better to have BJP than non-BJP, but, this kind of trope also applies to people who are not BJP, like Manmohan Singh, even though he was very popular, but, there were in RSS circles a sense that he, perhaps in some areas was not effective, though it's not just, as you know, it wasn't just in RSS circles you had this, you had it within the Congress party itself.
Yes. Mohan Bhagwat has been in the position that he's been in for about 15 years now.
Mhm.
Possibly in September this year when he turns 75. Do you think he could step down?
No.
No? That's not going to happen?
No, and I don't think Modi is going to step down at that age either, because he's born, I think, the same year.
Yes,
as-
just a few days
yeah.
apart.
Will he step down because of that? And it's not a written rule. It's not, but it's kind
But
of
it's something that Mohan Bhagwat
has talked about, yes,
about
and
himself.
others as well.
Yes.
No, I don't think it's going to happen. No one I know who I've spoken to on this issue has said they thought it was going to happen. I don't think. In part because he's been effective. He's been able, and the RSS is not as nearly as cohesive as some people think it is. And you have various views. You have some who think, I've spoken to some who think, well, 75, he said, others said, you should retire and kind of relax in your old age. And if you go to the RSS headquarters in Nagpur, and maybe here too, I haven't seen their new headquarters, but I'm told it's very fancy what they have. But you see older RSS people who were bachelors who are living there, who have kind of retired. In fact, I recall interviewing a few of them, and they saw the age 75 as a time you begin to deteriorate quickly, and therefore you should retire. Now, why do I say that the present one is not likely to? He doesn't, he seems to be very healthy. He gets around, and I don't know of any group significant in the RSS which is asking for him to be replaced by someone younger.
So,
and if
so for all practical purposes, the 75 norm convention / rule, is that going to be redundant?
I think that there's still a view that 75 is the age when you should consider retiring. And here again, to use an international example, and take America, one of the arguments against Joe Biden was, and he was only, 80, 81? And look at the man who won is 78 going on 79. They're above that 75 margin.
Yeah.
Yes, yet, the president to be, is healthy and coherent and for people who support him can do what he wants. And I'd say the same is true here in India.
So now, talking a little bit more about Bhagwat, since he's been there for 15 years, and as you say, he's likely to be there for some more time, we still know so little about him. How would you characterize his 15 years of leadership thus far, and how do you think he has been different from his predecessors? Because a lot of people say he is the moderate within the RSS, or he's more liberal than his predecessors. How would you characterize his leadership?
He represents an organization which has a lot of parts and representing many socioeconomic interests. You could not have a person at that level who was too much on one side. It would be dangerous. If someone who was too much on one side of an issue or a set of issues, you would have within the organization calls for his retirement. I haven't seen that. I've not seen any major publication saying, well, he's 75, and at that age he should leave. I haven't seen that. And as long as he's effective and coherent, I don't think you will get that, no. So is it redundant? It's not a rule as such. It's not, quote, a law. It's a sense that at a certain age you should consider retiring, which is probably true, in fact. Because most people, when they get to 75 or older, they begin to decline.
Yes.
And as I said, look at the example of Joe Biden.
Right.
He had to resign because people felt he was not effective.
Of course. But about Mohan Bhagwat, what is for you the most significant part of either his personality or his leadership which has stood out for you?
He's able to sort of get people to talk to each other, and in part because people respect him and they don't see him as sort of rigid on the issues that count for Indians. In terms of foreign policy, since that's the world I worked in for many years as well, I think they see, Modi and Jaishankar, his external affairs minister, as effective in representing Indian interests overseas. And particularly Modi has gone to the Middle East, where you have a huge Indian diaspora. He's even, seen to it that Hindu temples were erected there. Now, is that seen as a religious act? On the face of it, one should say yes, but I think he and others see it, like the Ram Temple in Ayodhya, as more a kind of national symbol of India. Now, not everyone thinks that, but many people do. And it's like here again, the example I used of Notre Dame.
Yes.
I think many people see that as a symbol of India. And in terms of your question as to how the evolution of the Sarsanghchalak, he, I think, has always been considered to be moderate. And has kind of worked the RSS in that direction. Like, for example, this well-known seminar that he had a few years ago, and also his annual speeches at this about October, November.
Yeah, the Vijayadashmi.
Yeah, the Vijayadashmi. And so I look at them, you can see. I mean, he does talk about political issues in those, but he talks about it not in a sense that how to put it, too much on one side or the other, but let's look at what is necessary, and let's try to sort of work out a solution that gets as many people, get a consensus as is possible. And I think people respect him from within the organization. They see him as a relatively, moderate person. I don't think he could hold the office very long if he were not moderate. And I think a successor, probably Hosbole, maybe it's not a good thing to say, but is also a moderate. I don't think you could. You have so many different interests represented in the RSS. It is not near. One of the hugest mistakes on the RSS, and you have probably seen this too, is it's often portrayed as much more homogenous than it is, much more linked, together than it is. There's a lot of debate, and here again, people should buy my book to get the sense of that, because in all the instances I mentioned, I tried to pick out issues where there were major debates that took place within the RSS and its affiliated organizations, and that has long been there. And I think the RSS could do a more effective job in portraying itself. There's Ram Madhav himself got in trouble in that article that he wrote where he talked about this and the evolution. So the heads, the various leadership have to be a little careful in how they approach this issue, because they're obviously kind of hardliners within it who don't want anything to change, and they'd like to go back 30 years. But India is changing, and if it doesn't change, it won't be the organization that is as influential as it is today. A lot of people are afraid of its influence, though it has influence because it is changing.
Yeah, and I think that's crucial. What do you hear from people and the RSS leadership about Modi's successor? Who do you think they would, if you were Sarsanghchalak today, who would you want as Modi's successor? Would it be Yogi? Would it be Amit Shah? Would it be Gadkari, Fadnavis, Shivraj Singh Chauhan?
Of all of those, the one closest to the RSS is Gadkari. He's closest to the Sarsanghchalak, and he's long been, a person who, as I understand, who approaches, the Sarsanghchalak for advice. In part because he
the RSS would prefer him over, say, a Yogi or an Amit Shah.
I've asked that question and no one has given me a good answer on. I think they're afraid I'll quote them. So no, I've asked that question to at least 10, 15 people, including 2 people since I've been coming here. And they all kind of skirt the issue and say, oh, we'll get someone who's good. And by good, someone who will keep the organization together and be somewhat similar to what it is today. So who would it be? I think Modi will be around for a while, as long as he is judged as an effective person, both in terms of Indian foreign policy as well as domestic policy. The Indian economy, is the fastest growing of the large economies in the world today. It's, as I say, it's about to move from 5 to 3 in terms of the largest economy. India, in terms of its military, is one of the best militaries in the world.
Yeah.
And it has it has nuclear capability. It's about to sort of significantly enhance its naval fleet, in part because of the Chinese incursion.
Yes.
So as long as Modi is seen as doing an effective job externally and internally, there won't be a call for his replacement. I have not seen I have heard people who have said he should be replaced, but none of them are, significant at the top. And I haven't seen any evidence of a significant move to replace him.
But once Modi does go, and at some point it will happen.
He will, yes, at some point.
Would the RSS, do you think, would they be comfortable with someone like Yogi Adityanath?
They would be more comfortable with Gadkari. There has never been a leader of the RSS after Shyama Prasad Mukherjee who is non-RSS. And there's a certain sense of comfort in that background because they know that a person with that background has a sense of the unity of the RSS and the BJP.
And the discipline of the organization.
And discipline, yes. And who sees patriotism toward India as all important, that as long as you have, a certain sense of belongingness, that is what, of Indians, which is why I think, the Sarsanghchalak has, when he's talked about Muslims, that, we have the same DNA, because I think that's what he's trying to portray. And so it will be someone who fits in the kind of moderate, probably the next one, RSS background, which answers your question as to, who would that be? And probably somewhat younger, and this is why somebody has told me Gadkari might not be a good choice. He's quite old already. Yes. So you'd have to kind of look down as to, if you look around, people who are BJP politicians.
What are the names that occur to you? Someone like Fadnavis?
No one has mentioned a name to me. And I'm sure you have found the same thing.
Yeah, because absolutely. I think it's a standard reaction where they just skirt the question.
They'll skirt the question, or, maybe there's 12 people or 5 people and da 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 da. Yeah. No one has been, because that would appear to be disloyal, Now, people are more willing to talk about, who's willing to follow the present Sarsanghchalak, because almost unanimous hospoli, and because he's effective, he gets around, he knows people. So my guess, it would be an RSS member of good standing, who comes off as moderate, who knows how to get things done. Now, some people have mentioned, what about Ram Madhav? Would he fit into that? I think you hinted at that in an earlier question. He may be too moderate, and I'm not sure. I really don't know. But he's obviously been rehabilitated. Yeah. And the President Sarsanghchalak, who I know, really does like him. But it's different. I think you need someone, in terms of who follows the President Sarsanghchalak or who follows Modi when that happens. Yeah. Someone who kind of sort of is established as moderate, so he can get the various parts of the RSS together. And here again, the other key thing one has to remember about the RSS, it operates on the thing of consensus. Yeah. You have to get someone who is accepted by most of the major factions of the RSS, and that would include particularly its various affiliated groups, particularly the party, the BJP, its youth group, the Vidyarthi Parishad, its labor group, the Mazdoor Sangh. I mean, those are the big 3. But there are others, and so a sense of acceptance in the leadership of those. In fact, most of the senior leadership of the RSS has particularly have gone through the youth, the Vidyarthi Parishad. They've had a sense of training in that. Yes. And so it's someone who has a kind of record of being able to handle things in the RSS, and especially someone who has handled, publicity, who's gotten themselves, known. And the present head of the publicity part of the RSS has done an effective job.
The global image of the RSS, and over the last 100 years, I mean, initially, I think there was a lot of suspicion about the RSS in the global media.
In India itself.
In India itself, of course, but even globally, it was seen with some degree of suspicion. Do you think that continues to be the case, or has the RSS's global image changed fundamentally?
I think there is, I think it's changing, not necessarily positively, but more, for some it's positive. But for example, there's a wonderful article in the Wall Street Journal by Walter Russell Mead, who's one of their major writers. He wrote an article specifically praising the RSS. And it was when he was not this visit to India, but a previous one, he actually went, made an effort to look at the RSS. And in fact, I was a little surprised. You have the Wall Street Journal is, in some ways, with the New York Times, the major national newspapers in the U.S., where you have this article, which, praises the RSS. And so I'd say the general view is less critical. Though you're right, in fact, until not that long ago, when people wrote about the RSS, it was either hard right, fascist, or something like that. And I think, a person like the President Sarsanghchalak is reacting to that. I think you may even have more of it in Europe than you have here. But I'd say the image, you now have a government for 10 years, which is, a BJP government. And you're likely to have, to be quite frank, this government is not going to fall anytime soon. And you could have, it could continue on as well. And if the opposition continues to be as divided as they are, it's very likely that they will continue. And so this has an impact on it. And then India plays a vital role, now we're talking about the West and the US, in organizing Asian countries, not to be anti-Chinese as well as a bloc to Chinese advances.
So it's less convenient also for the West to be hypercritical of the RSS now.
Right.
It's also a compulsion for them to engage with
well, because the leadership here is from the RSS. And so I'd say there's certainly less, there are people who are opposed to it, and you see that in columns, but it's much less than it was in the past. And for example, the term fascist, which to represent the RSS, used to be relatively common. It's much less common today.
But do you think that change is more strategic, or do you think it's actually ideological, where they're like, okay, maybe they're not as bad?
Both. The strategic element has to be important because India as a country now plays a role which is represented in the press, but it didn't in the past. Its economy is much better. It now plays a major role in the economic development. Modi himself plays a role. He's, everywhere. Around the world, and people listen to him. The Chinese know that he's an effective leader, and so they have to sort of be careful in how they handle him. So as long as that continues, that's strategic. It's likely to sort of spill over into the ideological as well.
Right.
If you find a person appealing or someone important because of strategic purposes, you're also likely to sort of find them more acceptable for ideological reasons.
Right. This has to be my final question, but this has been such an insightful talk. Through the 100 years, RSS has obviously grown from strength to strength. There have been moments where it has also been banned and so on. We didn't get into that, but that's fairly well known. But going ahead, what do you think could potentially pose challenges or perhaps existential threats, if any, to the organization?
Well, one is something we've talked about already. When the BJP, they're now already getting people trained from the outside coming in, like the chief minister of UP, but there are others as well. When those numbers increase, what kind of impact is that going to have on the BJP as a political party? And its relationship with the RSS, because if you have people who did not go through the RSS training and don't have that sense of loyalty to the organization as such, what impact is that going to have? It's going to be a very interesting question, on that. The other thing is if relations with China and Pakistan deteriorate seriously, that's going to arouse a nationalist surge in this country. And like all nationalist surges, it could help, it could create more extremist reactions of loyalty to the country and all that. So that's something to look at, and there's really potential. I'd say more with China than with Pakistan.
But how could that pose a threat to the RSS?
Oh, not a threat.
Or a challenge?
It's a challenge in that you're likely to get more people under those kind of hyper circumstances who will take a hard line, and who may take a cultural hard line. Is this traditionally Indian? Is this Hindu or not? So that's a real, particularly if the problem is with Pakistan. Now with China, less so, because there's not a kind of Chinese diaspora in this country. But there are a lot of Muslims in this country. Most of them are loyal Indian. When I was serving at the embassy here, and my household staff were all Muslim. And yet I recall at times when they had, what is this television series that was everyone watched? This was about 20 years ago, 25 years ago. It had to do with the epics, Hindu epics, the Mahabharata,
Yes, Ramayana.
and the Ramayana. And they, when that came on, I had to make sure nothing was happening when that was, they absolutely said they had to watch it, which is interesting because, and in some ways that series is very patriotic. And in fact, you could sort of relate to the present circumstances, to the patriotism that was geared to that. And they thought that was absolutely right. Absolutely right.
So these could possibly be some of the challenges that the RSS could face going ahead.
Right.
All right. This has been so insightful, Professor. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. I always find these interesting because it forces me to think about issues as well. Anyway,
thank you. Thank you so much for watching.